So the question was that many times, especially Westerners have got the view that we can derive all we need for practice from the scriptures, and that in our tradition we follow the Ajahns, the Kruba Ajahns, and many times maybe what is the role of the Ajahn, and is it possible just to only practice according to the scriptures and derive the correct way of practice from the sutras, saying that this is my only teacher? Ajahn answered, it all depends on the strength of our mind. And in fact, what we derive from the suttas does depend on what the power of our mind provides. The suttas, in fact, they contain everything already, and the Dhamma talks, whatever Dhamma talk we listen to or read or hear, is already very complete, and the suttas contain the Dhamma, and the Kruba Ajahns and the tapes that we listen to contain the Dhamma, but whatever we pick up is up to the one that listens and the power of the mind. And the guidelines, they are there, they're given directly already, but there's the need to practice and to put them into practice accordingly. So Ajahn says, what one derives from the suttas, or is able to derive from the scriptures, depends on one's vasana, barami. Vasana is a gift of merit from the past that one has. Barami is spiritual potential. And it depends on the vasana barami of the one that studies, how much he can take out of the studies for practice. Because when we study, we don't see the living example. And how much we follow what we read and put into practice depends on how strong our mind is and how much sattva we have, how much faith we have into what we read. The thing that really matters is to take the things that one has heard or read into practice. Whether the sattva, samadhi and panya that we have built up is bound for taking us to liberation or not depends on what he said is the capital, or the amount of stored barami. And if one misjudges that, one can go astray, one can be lost and deluded. The panya that we have already accumulated or are already equipped with can also be misused. Also samadhi can lead us astray. If we've got a samadhi, we can get lost. So in that sense, to compare one's experiences with the scriptures is good, but to compare it with the Kruba Ajahns is the thing that where one learns from example, learns from practice. Ajahn says, if we don't yet have a foundation in samadhi, it is good to follow the scriptures. It is okay to follow the scriptures. But if we have samadhi, we might get lost in our samadhi, and we need somebody to correct us, to tell us where to go. And presently we do have the Ajahns, the Kruba Ajahns are around and are ready to teach us. So we should follow the advice of these teachers, because usually we tend to doubt, and there are phases when we tend to doubt, and the Ajahn can correct this. Sometimes the scriptures, on the other hand, might just increase our doubts, make us more confused. If we have a lot of barami, then only a little bit of scriptural studies and a little bit of the texts would help us a lot. Luang Por Chah himself, he had some scripture, some guidelines, but he felt that he needed more of a guidance through a living teacher. And this living with a living teacher, or living with following the guidelines of the teachers, prevents us from being heedless or careless, pamada, like to be negligent. Because sometimes we might even hold on to the scriptures or to the things that we have read, and this can also lead us astray. And this is because our varami, our potential, is not enough to understand by ourselves. So the Kruba Ajahns, they have gone to the end of the path, and therefore this is the safe way. So the discourses, the suttas, the teachings that we read, we can take as guidelines. But if we hold on to them as the only reference, we probably won't attain freedom from doubt. Doubt arises as a hindrance, and we think, is what we are practicing correct? Is it really the right way? Will it help me? Will it further my meditation? And we get into a chaos of our thoughts, and there's distraction, and many ways to think. Teachers then can help us out and show us a way. All this doubt arises because our sati, our mindfulness, is still too weak, and the doubting faculty is just too big. Then to listen to the Dhamma talks of the Kruba Ajahns that stem from experience, and to listen to the teachings of the teachers can clarify things. Because these words are not only the words, it's not only scriptures. They contain the energy and the experience needed for further practice. They contain the power of mind of the teachers. Many times they are an expression of the energy that took their practice further. Then, if we walk the path following the example of our teachers, that helps to then increase our faith because of the example that we have as a living example. Nowadays, many of our famous teachers have passed away, and what they have taught becomes textbook knowledge. But in fact, it is approved knowledge in the sense that it is all the results of their practice. Lompo Cha, for example, went to see Lompo Pao, who is a teacher that had already died when he arrived at the monastery of Lompo Pao. And the guidelines that Lompo Cha took over from Lompo Pao are still our main structure of Kawat and Vinaya these days, and they helped him tremendously in his practice, and they helped him to proceed in the way of the practice, because they are a result of the practice and the studies of Lompo Pao, a result of his barami and the things that he applied in order to forward his practice. These things, the Kawat and the Vinaya and the understanding of the Kruba Ajahns, can be a refuge to us. And this is not only in terms of the practice, but also in terms of the understanding of the Vinaya. Ajahn gives an example of Lompo Cha. One time, Lompo Cha, he was given orange juice by lay people, and it was in a bottle, and instead of just drinking it, he saw that it had bits in it. And that means he was mindful and saw these things, and then asked the lay people, or had the lay people filter it first. And this is something one can really remember if one has witnessed the Ajahn doing this. Another, it's different than in the textbooks, like when one simply reads it. Another example is that Ajahn Anan remembers that walking together with Lompo Cha and not taking off his sandals in time, when apparently Lompo Cha took off his sandals, and the student has to take off the sandals as well, and maybe say, like, if the teacher walks 10 meters and is going to take off his sandals, and the students need to take them off but a little earlier than that. Be ahead and be mindful and apply the Vinaya in time and know the Vinaya. This is a different experience than reading these rules in the Vinaya books. And the actual experience of having Nopa Chao testing with it, is he taking off his sandals in time, is another one than the textbook experience. So this is very important. The other example that Ajahn gave was some example of Nopa Chao picking up a stone, a rock in the boat, or using stones and rocks in the boat, which pointed out like that. He gave a teaching about like we use what we have to be content with what we have, with little, and using the things that nature provides there. Because the stones and rocks are things that are difficult to come about and to find and to have. So taking up the stones in order to build the boat, that was an example that Lumpur Cha showed. How to be content with little. That's how I understood it.
This story,
yeah.
Just this one. Yeah. I think it was like, never mind this one.
Yes, please.
Was collecting stones by the boat in Batapong, which in half an hour you would get only like a fistful of these stones. Yeah. But Ajahn Anan was doing it and saying, oh, we're just wasting time, half an hour and you get that little. Yeah. But in Ajahn Chah came and he just says something like, yeah, right. These stones, they're not. Where do they come from? Yeah. So it's not like they actually. It's stuff that was bought and came from somewhere else. So it's
they come from this.
It's valuable.
So
like you do use lots of time to collect these things, and it's just was example of frugality.
Yeah.
It was something valuable.
So to read things in the sutta can be very profound. There are many profound examples in the sutta of practice. For example, Venerable Ananda using his robes, or using the robes that cast away old robes for plastering concrete, plastering the huts, or for wiping things. And Ananda is a living example of frugality in the suttas. But if we read these things superficially, they don't enter the heart, they don't make us understand. But living with a teacher, showing these things to us, makes us incorporate these teachings into our life and into our practice. And Lumpur Liam himself gives a lot of examples for frugality and being content with little, or being equanimous. And so let us all try and to emulate and take the examples from the sutta and reinforce those guidelines with the practices by the Ajahns, so that our practice goes correctly, develops in the correct way. And don't believe yourself too much. Don't believe what you think too much. Take the guidelines of the Ajahns, and then you can reflect on them. So Ajahn Anan himself says he's read a lot, and sometimes he would believe the teachers, and sometimes not. He wouldn't, or he would not always really take what he had heard on, and he wouldn't always go in very deeply. So sometimes he was also quite critical, and he went to see many places, or many of us actually go to many places and see various Ajahns and temples, and it does take a lot of effort and time to find what are the teachings or what are the teachers that one has faith in, or that make faith arise in oneself. So to keep in mind that many Ajahns have attained liberation, and it is up to us to take this teaching, these teachings, and develop them into one's own practice, and to believe in the way of practice that are given, the ways of practice that are given by their examples, is very important. So now Ajahn is giving a few examples of how to take only the suttas as a reference or foundation for one's understanding, without putting them into practice. That there'll be many differences and contradictions, even like that the way of the practitioner and the way of the one that studies. For example, the words vitaka vichara, like when we read them, and we might take up a certain theory what they mean, and say vitaka vichara being linked to thinking and proliferation, and in fact, like to use vitaka in the practice, it means like to take up the breath and keep with the breath. That's what I understood. And it is not linked to the thinking, and it is not linked to discussing anything in one's mind or proliferating, because the idea of vitaka vichara in the practice is that it is supposed to lead to peace. And the worldly understanding of vitaka vichara, those terms, is not meant for aiming at peace or leading to meditation. It is meant for, it is understood in a different sense. So the same goes, holds true for getting an understanding of words like piti and sukha. When we practice, we are able to understand what these terms really mean. And vitaka vichara, or ekagata, which is translated many times as one-pointedness, if we really sit in meditation and experience this process, we know that it doesn't have to do anything with one thinking or pointing the mind, and it is just a stillness of mind, and there's no thinking, and there's only one factor of stillness in there. And to know one-pointedness or ekagata, one really needs to practice, and the stillness that it is related to can be found only when one does the practice. It is not referred to or cannot be accessed by the language of the books, which is the samuti, the conventional language, and it's not the real experience. Or talking about like panya that arises from inside, and wisdom that arises from vipassana, panya arising from vipassana. For example, when we read the word panya in the suttas, we take it as being involved with thinking, and to get a wider understanding of the word panya, we need to have the experience of samadhi. And or the other way, if we practice samadhi and we become attached to samadhi, then also there won't be real panya, real insight. So the experience of these terms in the practice needs to be cultivated, and the teachers give us example for them. For example, another example Ajahn mentioned is the emptiness of nama and rupa. Speaking from the textbooks is not done with the pure mind of somebody who sees these things. And when one practices, one attends to this pure mind who sees what this kind of emptiness in terms of rupa and nama is all about. One practices, one cannot always compare things with the theory. The theory is a kind of philosophy, and there are many discussions about these terms. For example, whether nibbana is atta or anatta. The experience that practitioners make, they're all the same, and they have the same take on these answers of philosophical problems, because they arise from experience. Sometimes we think when we study, this terms that we have studied have been understood by us very deeply, and we've come to a deep understanding of certain topics. But if we haven't practiced yet, this actually isn't true. Sometimes we're just attached to a certain view about these things. So we practice first and compare our experience to the textbooks. If we take only the textbooks first and then practice, we may go very wrong. Another example is the term Sakaya Ditti. There's the problem that thinking about it and studying it, one may think that it means that there's no self, and but it's actually about the changing of the views about the self. And in the textbook, one may discuss the terms and thinking, actually, one has attained to a state of non-self already. Why is then there still loba, dosa, and moha for somebody who has attained to the abandonment of Sakaya Ditti? So that creates a problem. But in practice, we experience when we come to that point that just the view about the self has changed. And this change of view reduces loba, dosa, moha. First only the view changes, and later the knowledge that abandons loba, dosa, moha completely arises. Many times people quote the Abhidhamma, and the Abhidhamma is very far away from practice, and therefore a lot of theoretical problems arise. The Abhidhamma is even derived from the Suttas, and it's further away from the practice even more. And for example, people used to discuss with Rinpoche about the nature of somebody who is free from kilesa, whether that means that the kilesas are still there but the mind is unaffected, or whether that person is in a state of complete emptiness where there's nothing, so there can't be any kilesas. And Rinpoche's experience that he mentioned that actually the kilesas, they may not be finished or emptied out. The citta is not empty. The kilesas are not empty, but the citta is just completely unaffected by it. And the kilesas and the citta can go together. And then if one sees these terms in terms of Abhidhamma, then one starts discussing, well, what about the citta? What is the citta ours? Is it empty? And what happens if the citta is there, still there? Are the kilesas there, still there? There's endless comparing and discussing, and we don't take our practices and insights as our basis, but theory. And then what's even more dangerous is that when people start teaching and based on theory, you can teach very, very wrongly, and the teachings may even be so wrong that the teacher could go to hell for that. And like this Ajahn hasn't had an experience with Rinpoche, Rinpoche standing there listening to somebody teaching about Paticca Samuppada and making a big theory about how avijja makes the kilesas arise and upadana arise. And actually, Ajahn thought the teacher is very clever, very well read, but Rinpoche said, like, he's teaching nonsense and he's going to go to hell for that. He's teaching wrongly. And so one needs to be careful about one's understanding of the textbooks, whether it's real, and when one holds on to one's understanding of the textbooks and is teaching that, one may go very much the wrong way and teaching it even through some very negative karma. So to educate oneself in theory is okay, is a good thing, but one needs to follow the example of the teachers. And then when the teachers give you guidelines, then listen to them first and follow them, and then reflect. It is like there's a famous example of Sariputta. Venerable Sariputta, he wouldn't believe until he fully practiced what he had heard. He wouldn't yet believe. Some other questions?
When Ajahn observes his disciples and his monks generally these days, particularly young monks, what does he see as being the biggest obstacle or problem that's holding monks back from really progressing these days?
So the question about what is the biggest obstacle with the disciples these days, Ajahn Anan answered, it's the modern times, the development of the modern age, modernization. In former times, the monks lived in the forest, there was no electricity. But Nongpapong had a generator which was turned on every 14 days in order to do some things. And they, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock in the evening, they spent their time with hauling water for filling up the bowl washing area, or the toilets and the showers. And there were a lot of hardships. The life was simple, and they were prone to the difficulties of living in the forest. One way of viewing it, things like hauling the water, was to say what a burden sometimes. But the other way of seeing it was this was a good opportunity for physical exercise. And the time in Papong, in the times when Ajahn was there, sometimes they had just a single cup of nampana or a bit of sugar, but they still could survive. And now these days, it's the days of plenty, the days of modernization, the days of development, and we need to keep in mind that our teachers, our Ajahns, have passed a lot of hardships, and everything we have today is already very comfortable, and everything is ready for us to use, and the faith of the lay people makes tremendous support possible. Therefore, we must deliberately cultivate to be of few wishes, be content with little. Before there wasn't much support at all, so naturally one had to bear with things, one had to have oton. This is the Thai word for patiently endure things or bear with things. And these days there are many ways to get things and to use facilities, so there's less oton. And even in the times of Ajahn Chah, like when Ajahn Anan was living with Rinpoche, he was already told that the early days of Papong were much more difficult, and one had to have much more oton. And Rinpoche said that Central Thais in that time, even they wouldn't be able to stand Wat Nong Papong as it was in the early days. So when Ajahn Anan came, there was already some development and some more convenience, but still Rinpoche deliberately stressed to practice patient endurance, to practice to have oton. For example, going to the hospital when one was sick, Ubon Hospital was only 15 kilometers away, and Warin Hospital 6 kilometers, so one could walk. So whenever one was sick, one took the way to Warin Hospital and walked there. And sometimes they had to carry each other and support each other if one was really sick. And Rinpoche just said, why go see the doctor? Why don't just endure the sickness? Why don't you just bear with it? If we always immediately go to the hospital, then one then one would prove that one doesn't actually have the patient endurance, one doesn't have the quality of Ajahn, and one would be in fact a bit ashamed of asking Rinpoche to be able to be allowed to go to the hospital. For example, in the second pansa of Tanaja Anan, the Bindabad round to Banjan was flooded and quite high, so the water was all the way half up to his calves, and Tanajan caught an infection and all kinds of pus, he got infected, and in fact, as I understood the story, he said he was too timid to ask to go to the hospital because it would mean that he wouldn't have enough Ajahn patient endurance to bear with it, and the Rinpoche would probably be of the opinion that the hospital couldn't help anyway, so they did a herbal treatment, and it took 3 months to get the infected wounds to heal. And Rinpoche would just say, you use the Dhamma or Sot, the medicine of Dhamma, like as we do in chanting Sakatawa, and it's Dhamma or Satan, Uttarwan is the highest medicine is the Dhamma. And whether one goes or not to the hospital, things won't heal anyway, was the take on going to the hospital. So at that time they were living in nature, and the Kruba living together with the Kruba Ajahns, and the general feeling about this was it was good practice. Soon Tanajan moved to Lamluka. They still had to practice patient endurance quite a lot because Lamluka was very hot, and their kutis had tin roofs, and it was very hot there during the day, so actually naturally one didn't want to sleep during the day because it just got too hot, and after some time, so just when one had taken a little rest, the ants were coming out to bite one and lick the sweat, so one wanted to get up and walk jongkrom, and so and they, even though it was very hot, they refused to accept the ice that lay people offered every day, just for the practice, for the sake of practicing some patient endurance and to bear with having not all the comfort that one can. And this was all done in order to strengthen one's mind, to build up Gamlanjit, to build up power of mind. And because as soon as we are pleased with something, the kilesas arise, the kilesas come and they are gratified. And that's why one really has to be aware that one doesn't become attached to pleasures and happiness and to comfort. For example, in those times when somebody gave Pavarana an invitation for requisites, one still wouldn't be supposed to ask for anything. That was for the sake of being content with whatever one gets, content with little. Wat Ajahn in the beginning was very difficult to live, and people said if one comes to Wat Supataban pot, one needs to be ready to die. That's because of the malaria. Sitting around like this tonight would have been almost impossible. You'd have like any mosquito biting any monk could easily carry malaria, and out of the 17 monks they were then, each one had malaria, one after the other, and some of them to the level of fainting and crashing their head on the ground and walking Bindabad and falling over. And one they took to the hospital needed 7 bottles of blood for his blood transfusion. So it was very risky, but it reflected the old spirit of Rinpoche saying that if you come to Papong, whoever dies first will be cremated. I'll cremate you all if you die. That was the saying that was received in Papong in those days. And just for us to remember that the Ajahns needed to fight obstacles quite a lot until those monasteries that we know today came to be. And today that we're in a state of modernization and development, we easily become attached to comfort and happiness. And in order to go against this tendency, like there were many practices, for example in Papong at the end of Pansa, everybody was supposed to sleep outside under the trees in the clod, put up the clod at the foot of the trees and leave the kuti for the sake of not being attached to comfort. And we tried this practice in Rayong, but it would always rain every few days already, so the earth was kind of never dry enough to do that. So one kind of has to adapt, but generally make an effort in the present day and age to be decided, to be what they call magnoi sando, to be like a few wishes and content with little, and to have patience, endurance, to be able to bear with difficulties. These days we say we need to go to the hospitals because otherwise our body won't be so strong and we won't be able to practice so well. So if we use that reasoning, we need to really then use our healthy body for practice. If we have a body that's kept healthy, we really need to be not negligent and use our opportunity for practice. And all the requisites that we have that support our practice we need to use in a frugal way. Those days at Papong they didn't have water in the kutis and there weren't any bathrooms, or there were only few bathrooms, like every few kutis needed to share bathrooms. And it was quite a hassle if you had diarrhea or digestive problems, not feeling well, just to find the next bathroom. And these days we've got bathrooms under our kutis, and when we don't feel, we still complain that we have to go downstairs to the bathroom. So it's different these days. We've got a lot of more conducive facilities. And we sometimes forget that it is actually dukkha that makes panya arise. It's the suffering that makes us become wiser. For example, having long bindabat rounds or practicing to eat deliberately little and then to watch oneself. Isn't one's mind becoming more peaceful when one eats little? What happens if we eat too much? If we eat the full variety, is the mind easily getting peaceful? These days, we really have to depend on our determination to live simply and to live frugally. It is to create situations where dukkha arises and panya comes out of dukkha. Rinpoche definitely made the monks see dukkha in the first place. Because as soon as one sees only sukha, one easily becomes attached. With dukkha giving rise to panya, one benefits and one builds up an attitude of fighting and going against things and resisting, and the mind becomes more and more strong. There needs to be virya, conscious effort and determination. So today everything is ready for us to use for our practice, so we may not be negligent. We've got the 4 requisites complete and in abundance, so we need to practice to have patient endurance on our own, by our own determination. Another very big obstacle these days for the disciples practicing after the teacher is the lack of respect that people generally have towards their teachers and towards each other. There's a clear difference in that between Central Thai and the Isan, and there's a little part that I missed. But Anan said that there's an inbuilt respect in the system that we relate to each other. We shouldn't get lost in. We shouldn't get lost in. The Isan monks he praises are dedicating their lives, and they're really willing to sacrifice their lives for their teachers, and they're dedicated to listen to the teacher. So a great benefit result from having respect in the training of the teachers. And one of the big obstacles these days is not to have that full dedication, full respect. But these days, if we want to adapt and want to create this, we have to do it gently and little by little. Otherwise, we can't take it. It's too much. Do it little by little.